Minister, something interesting has come to my attention about the census. There has, very rightly, given this scale of the housing crisis in this country, been a focus for quite some time, years, on the issue of vacant and derelict properties in the country. And many people, myself included, for some time have been asking that as part of trying to address that crisis, we identify the number of vacant and derelict properties, which everybody and many deputies have come in here time and time again citing the number of them in their own areas, towns and villages, and the people's frustration and their frustration at the fact that these are not being used to house people who are affected by the housing crisis. What I didn't know, and it's thanks to somebody who's been communicating with my office and communicating with the CSO, is that in the last census in 2016, the CSO didn't do any count of derelict properties. They did a count of vacant properties, which I think most people assumed, and the figures are fairly eye-watering. They identified in 2016 183,312 vacant properties, which is a pretty staggering number, which, if even a reasonable portion of them could be quickly turned around and refurbished and made available to people affected by the housing crisis, that would have a very, very significant impact on the housing crisis. But what is now apparent from the correspondence of this person who's been communicating with me, with the CSO, is that eye-watering figure of vacant properties did not include derelict properties, which means there's a very, very significant number beyond that of derelict properties which could also be potentially used for housing. The definition that was operated in terms of vacant properties given to the enumerators was the following. Dwellings under construction and derelict properties were not, sorry, this is a note back from the CSO. Dwellings under construction and derelict properties were not included in the count of vacant dwellings. As a result, the empty housing units were classified as vacant house, vacant apartment or holiday home, only if the dwelling was considered fit for habitation by the enumerator. In the case of newly constructed buildings, that meant that the roof, doors, windows or walls had to be completely built or installed. For older dwellings that were unoccupied, the roof, doors and windows had to be fully intact. Now, think about it, even from the most cursory kind of walk down the streets of Dublin, or probably anybody's town or village here, you can imagine a lot of those older buildings, a broken window, a door or window boarded up, not counted in the last census, even though the last census identified an absolutely staggering 183,000 vacant units. And it was apparent in the Oireachtas committee yesterday, where Dublin City Council were questioned on this matter, that Dublin City Council hadn't got a clue. The biggest local authority in the country has no clue about derelict properties in Dublin City. They did one walk-around survey of, I think, about 45 properties in 2015, and that was it. And there's no working definition of derelict properties. So I would ask the Minister to take this very seriously. It is a matter of urgency for us to identify the housing stock that potentially could be useful for addressing the incredibly severe housing crisis we are now facing. We need a working definition, and we need absolute certainty that derelict properties, I should say, it will be included in the census that is being conducted in 2022. I would say that I think, frankly, local authorities should be instructed before that to have an operating definition of dereliction, and should have a systematic and scientific, indeed, approach to identifying them even before that, because it is an absolute scandal that there are so many vacant and derelict buildings. But we can't even begin that work unless we have a clear definition of what a derelict site is, and that those properties are actually being counted.
Thank you, Deputy, and acknowledge the points you've raised there. Just regarding there was a consultation process and pilot survey which the government decided on new questions and new structure that was going to be put into the census that was meant to run this year, and the questions have already been set, and that was agreed by government in 2019, and that's now being operationalised. So a lot of the material that's being used by the enumerators has already been printed, and the whole structure of the process has been formalised. I take your point on the distinction between vacant properties and derelict properties, and you're correct in saying that we do need to have greater detail, and local authorities. I didn't see the contribution yesterday from Dublin City Council, but I know from my own experience as a member of a local authority on Fingal a number of years ago that there does need to be updated register of what is or isn't a derelict property, and I'll certainly bring your feedback back to the CSO, but I think there's also an obligation on local authorities to work through what is derelict within their area, and whether that's possible. I don't have the detail before me here today on what definition is being used around vacant properties for the census that's taking place next year, but I'll ask that detail to be sent to you. But I said, separate to that, as you discussed at the Oireachtas committee yesterday, it'll be important for local authorities to also follow through on their obligations around the Housing for All plan, and the importance of utilising both vacant stocked and derelict properties to contribute towards the ongoing housing shortage. So just to say, the government approval on content was granted in July of 2019, which then set out the layout design and the structure of questions and the guidelines for enumerators, and then printing took place. So we are now about operationalising the census, and there isn't any reopening of what's already been decided when it comes to the census that's due to take place in March. As you know, it's an enormous operation that now has to happen, and that's the current position. But I will ask them to engage with yourself and to send, and I'll try and get further detail on you around the current definition of what is a vacant property, and around the broader issue around derelict properties and how they're assessing that. And the census is obviously one issue, but obviously the CSO have a broader remit around data collection, and I'll ask for further detail and information on that. Thank you, Minister.